The malfunction was logged at 041 station time, and the Sethan on watch did not wake me, because to a Sethan a malfunction is a clerical matter and I was not, by their reckoning, qualified to file paperwork. I heard about it anyway. On a picket station you hear about everything eventually, because there is nothing else to do but listen, and listening was the one thing I had been brought aboard to do. I was the only human on the Korreth Picket, station number 9 of a survey chain the Sethan Commissariat of verified signal had strung along the edge of a contested system, watching a planet they had not finished arguing over. The world below us was dark-watered and cloud-wrapped, a blue marble under thin gray weather, and the Sethan called it Unverified Body 6 because they had not yet agreed on a name, and would not until a committee 3 jumps away released the funds to convene about it. They were a patient people that way. They could argue about a name for longer than the planet had taken to cool. I had been on the picket for 210 days. I knew this because I counted them in the human way on the back of a ration sleeve I kept in my locker. The Sethan did not count days. They counted cycles of the verification engine, which was a different thing, slower, and which made their reports read like the minutes of a meeting that would never adjourn. It is worth saying what a picket station is, because a man who has never stood one cannot imagine the particular weight of it. The Korreth Picket was a fixed observation platform, a long spar of habitat and array hung in a stable point above Unverified Body 6, and its entire purpose was to watch. It did not patrol. It did not intercept. It sat and it listened, and it filed what it heard, and a great deal of military life across the galaxy comes down to exactly that and nothing more glamorous. The Sethan had crewed it with 40 of their kind and one of mine, and the one of mine was a courtesy nobody had quite explained to me, a clause in an agreement signed 3 jumps away by people who would never set foot aboard. I was liaison. I was proof of cooperation between 2 powers that did not entirely trust each other, and did not entirely need to. Mostly, I was a man in a corner who happened to be good with signals, which the Sethan found mildly useful and largely beneath their notice. I had learned their routines the way you learn the routines of a house you are staying in, but do not own. I knew which cycle the cooling troughs ran, and which analyst preferred which console, and how Vessel Cora took her reports, standing, never sitting, her 4 arms arranged in postures I had spent 210 days learning to read. I knew that a junior who held all 4 arms still was frightened, and a junior who let the lower pair drift was at ease, and that the old ones folded the upper pair behind them when they were bored and brought them forward when something had finally earned their attention. I knew the smell of the station, a dry mineral smell that I had stopped noticing after the first month and only registered now when I tried to recall it. I knew the food which was adequate, and the silence which was not, because Sethan's silence is a busy thing, full of the small clicks and shifts of beings who do not fidget so much as recalculate. What I did not have in all those 210 days was a single conversation that mattered. The Sethan were not unkind to me. They were simply complete without me. They had built a world in which everything had been assigned a place, and the human did not have a place, only a corner, and a being without a place is not someone you talk to. He is something you have made allowances for. I had made my peace with that, too, the way I had made my peace with a great many things, and I had filled the empty cycles with the only thing I was good for, which was listening to the spectrum, the way my service had taught me patiently, without needing it to speak. So when the watch analyst, a junior named Resh Tellan, found a fault code on a dead band at 041, he did the proper Sethan thing. He logged it. He flagged it for the morning review. He did not wake the station commander, and he certainly did not wake the human, and then he went back to his cooling trough to rest the 4 arms he was so proud of, because Sethan arms cramp if they are held to a console too long, and the junior ones have not yet learned to pace themselves. I found out at the morning brief, which the Sethan held standing in a ring around the central display, while I leaned on the bulkhead at the back where I had been told, politely and repeatedly, to lean. "A spectral artifact on Band 11, Tellan reported. His voice came out of the translator flat, the way they all did, stripped of whatever music a Sethant throat made. Below the verification floor, intermittent, consistent with thermal noise from the lower array. The station commander was an old forearm named Vessel Korreth, gray-mottled across the crown plates the way the truly senior ones go, and she had the habit of folding her upper arms behind her while she listened, which I had learned meant she was bored. "Thermal noise," she repeated. "From an array we calibrated 19 cycles ago." "Arrays drift," Tellan said. "They drift," Korreth agreed, "according to a curve. Does it match the curve?" A pause. The junior had not checked. None of them had checked, because below the verification floor was, by Commissariat doctrine, beneath verification, and a thing beneath verification did not officially exist, and you do not spend cycles measuring the shape of a thing that does not exist. That was the whole structure of them, right there in that pause. They had built an entire civilization on the principle that if you did not certify a thing, it could not hurt you. I had spent 210 days learning not to laugh at that. I did not laugh at it now. I just listened, the way I had been brought aboard to listen, and I let the fault code sit in the back of my mind where the old training lived, and I did not say what I had already half recognized in the shape of it. Because I knew that cadence, not the content, the cadence, the spacing of the bursts, the long short long that no thermal source makes, the patient repetition of something that has decided it has all the time in the cosmos and intends to use it. I had heard it in a classroom a long way from here, played off an old recording while an instructor with a bad leg told a room full of recruits that this was the sound of one of ours, still transmitting, long after anyone had any right to expect it. He had played it 3 times, that instructor, and then he had let the silence sit, and then he had told us a thing I have never forgotten. He said that other species send distress calls the way a man shouts in a burning building, loud and brief and desperate, because they expect to be heard quickly or not at all. He said humans had learned, the hard way, across a long history of losing people to distances that did not care, to do it differently. A human distress call, he said, is not a shout. It is a vigil. You set it low, on a band that costs nothing, and you let it run, and you build it so that it can run for years on a dying power cell. Because the thing about the recovery service is that it does not give up, and a call that quits before the service arrives is a call that has murdered the man it was meant to save. He said the format we were listening to was older than any of us, that it had been carried out of the first dark losses and never changed, deliberately never changed, so that a man frozen in a derelict hull a century from now would put out the same call his great-grandfather would have recognized, and the same service would come. Then he had turned off the recording and said, "When you hear that, you are not hearing a man asking for help. You are hearing a man who knows with total certainty that help is already on its way and is simply telling it where to look. Remember the difference. It is the whole of who we are." I had remembered the difference. I remembered it now at the morning brief, listening to a junior Sethant file a vigil as thermal drift, and I said nothing, because it was not my brief to say. I said nothing, it was not my brief to say. File it as instrument drift, Korreth decided. Tellan, recalibrate the lower array on the next dark pass and confirm. If it persists, escalate to band review. She unfolded her upper arms, which meant the brief was over. The human may return to his post. The human returned to his post. My post was a console at the far curve of the bridge, angled so that I faced the others' backs, which I think they intended as a courtesy, and which suited me precisely. From there, I could see every board on the station, and no Sethant had to look at me while they worked. I brought up band 11 on my own screen, below their verification floor, in the part of the spectrum their doctrine told them was empty, and I watched the artifact repeat. Long, short, long, a gap, long, short, long, a gap a little shorter than the last. I let my hand rest on the panel without keying anything. I had a private theory about the gap, and the theory frightened me in a low, steady way that I had learned long ago not to let into my face. The theory was that the gap was getting shorter because the source was getting closer, that what we were hearing was not a fixed beacon drifting in noise. It was something approaching, and the change in the interval was the oldest signature there is, the one every species that has ever crossed a distance has had to learn, the sound of a thing closing range. I did not file my theory. The Commissariat did not take filings from the human. I went off watch at the end of the cycle, ate a rationed sleeve alone in the galley while two off-duty analysts discussed array drift curves with the intensity other people reserve for grief, and I lay in my rack and listened, in my head, to a long short long that I could no longer hear and could not stop hearing. Tellon recalibrated the lower array on the dark pass. I watched him do it from my corner, and there was something almost tender in his certainty. He was young, and he believed in his instruments the way the young believe in the things they have been taught before life has had a chance to correct them. He ran the calibration sequence with all four arms, a fluid, competent thing, the lower pair holding the reference load steady while the upper pair walked the adjustment. And when it was done, he sat back satisfied because he had corrected the fault, and a corrected fault is a closed matter, and a closed matter lets a Sethant rest. The artifact got stronger. I saw the moment he noticed. His lower arms went still first, then the upper, the Atti's drift draining out of him posture by posture until he held all four locked, and he leaned into his board and ran the sequence again, slower this time, the way you reread a sentence that has not made sense. He recalibrated again, certain he had made an error, because in the Sethant worldview an instrument is more trustworthy than a phenomenon, and the only honest explanation for an unexplained signal is that you measured wrong. He swapped the feed line. He ran the diagnostic suite twice. He pulled the maintenance logs on the lower array going back 40 cycles and read them with the grim focus of a man looking for the place where he failed. He found nothing, because he had not failed. Each time the artifact came back cleaner than before, climbing out of the noise floor toward the verification line like something walking up out of deep water toward a shore, and on the third dark pass it crossed the floor. It crossed the floor, and that changed everything because now it existed. I was on watch when it happened. I saw Tellon go rigid at his board, all four arms locking, which is what they do instead of flinching. He did not call out. He filed. He keyed the escalation he had been told to key, band review, and the verification engine took the artifact in and turned it over in its slow machine way and printed a finding. And the finding was the first thing in 210 days that I saw genuinely disturb vessel Korreth. "It is structured," she said. She did not say it to anyone, she said it to the display. "Commander," Tellon's translator came out higher than usual, which meant nothing in their language and everything in mine. "The artifact is structured. It carries information." Korreth leaned toward the board, upper arms coming forward now, no longer bored. "Below our floor, for 19 cycles, we have been logging an intelligent transmission as thermal noise." I kept my eyes on my own screen and my hands flat. On band 11, the long short long had become something more elaborate. It had grown a body. There were subpulses inside the main bursts now, a fine structure, and I recognized the architecture of it the way you recognize a face across a crowded room before you can put a name to it. It was a recovery hail. It was the long, patient call that one of ours puts out when it is lost and intends to be found. The format unchanged in the 70-odd years since some grieving committee on Earth had standardized it precisely so that it would never change, so that no matter how far out you drifted or how long you went dark, the thing that came looking for you would know your voice. I knew that voice. I had been taught it the way other children were taught prayers. I did not tell the Sethant what it was. I told myself this was discipline, that it was not my brief, that the Commissariat did not take filings from the human. All of that was true. But underneath the true reasons there was a colder one, and I had enough honesty left after 210 days to know it was there. The colder reason was that I wanted to see what they would do. I wanted to watch a civilization that had spent its whole history certifying the universe into submission meet a thing it could not certify and could not stop. And I wanted to watch it from the back of the room, leaning where they had told me to lean. That is not a kind thing to want. I have made my peace with it since. At the time, I only knew that I was very calm and that the calm felt old. "Decode it," Korreth ordered. They could not decode it. They tried for a full cycle. The Commissariat of Verified Signal had the finest decryption suite in 4 systems, an engine that had cracked the trade ciphers of 3 rival powers and the burial codes of a dead one, and it ran the recovery hail through every framework it owned and produced nothing, because the hail was not encrypted. It was simply not addressed to them. It was a format built by a species they had never bothered to verify, broadcast in a band beneath their floor, and their entire apparatus of understanding had been constructed on the assumption that anything worth hearing would announce itself in a frequency they had already approved. They had spent generations teaching the universe to speak to them in their own dialect, and the one thing the recovery hail would not do was speak to them. It spoke past them, to me if it had known I was here, which it did not yet, to the format I carried in my training, to the dead and the lost and the patiently waited for. On the 4th cycle, the hail did something that made even me sit forward. It answered our challenge tone. The Picket put out a challenge tone on a schedule, a standard interrogative ping, the radio equivalent of a sentry calling halt. It was automatic. It had been pinging into empty space for 19 cycles to no reply, because the only thing out there was a planet that did not transmit and a signal the Sethan had filed as noise. On the 4th cycle, 11 minutes after the challenge tone went out, the recovery hail came back carrying the challenge tone inside it, folded into the fine structure. Repeated back with a precision that admitted no possibility of coincidence. It had heard us. It was telling us it had heard us. And then in the same burst, it appended something new, a short clean packet at the end like a signature, and the Sethan decryption suite finally found something it could read, because this part was not in our format. This part was in theirs. The recovery flotilla, whatever it was out there, had reverse-engineered enough of the Commissariat's challenge protocol from a single ping to send back a reply the Commissariat could understand. The reply was 3 of their own characters. The engine rendered it, and Tellan read it aloud before he understood that he should not, before anyone could stop him, in the flat, stripped voice of the translator that took all the music out and left only the meaning. "It says," Tellan said, "we hear you." The bridge went very quiet. I had seen Sethan quiet before. They are not a loud people, but this was a different quiet, the quiet of a room full of beings who have just been spoken to by something they had decided was noise, in their own language, which it had learned from listening to them for the length of a single sentence. The recovery flotilla had taught itself their tongue in 11 minutes off one challenge ping, and used its first words to confirm, in the most procedural possible terms, that the conversation was now 2-way. Korreth recovered first, the old ones always do. "Range," she said. "Working," said Tellan, and then, "the structure of the signal, the interval is changing. The reply latency is decreasing." "Decreasing how?" "It is closing range, Commander." There it was, the oldest signature, the shortening gap. I had carried my private theory for 4 cycles, and now the junior had found it on his own board and said it out loud. And I felt something settle in my chest that was not quite relief and not quite dread, the way you feel when a thing you have been afraid of turns out to be exactly as large as you feared, and not one bit larger. There is a strange comfort in that. The unknown shrinks the moment it becomes the merely terrible. "Closing from where?" Korreth said. "We have a clear picket. Nothing crossed the verification perimeter. Nothing made it past the outer array." "Nothing did," Tellan said. "It is not coming from outside the perimeter, Commander." "Then where?" Tellan's 4 arms had gone very still. "It is already inside it. It has been inside it the whole time. We logged its approach as thermal drift. The bridge took that in. I watched it move through them, the way a cold draft moves through a room, analyst by analyst, the slow horror of a people who have just learned that the wall they trusted had a door in it the whole time, and the door had been standing open for 19 cycles. The outer array was the thing the Korreth Picket existed to maintain. It was the verification perimeter, the certified boundary, the line past which nothing could come without being measured and named and filed. And the recovery flotilla had not come past it. It had come up through the band beneath the floor, through the part of the spectrum the Sethant had ruled empty by doctrine, and from the perimeter's point of view, it had simply never been there at all, right up until the moment it was everywhere. "That is not possible," said one of the senior analysts, a heavy-set forearm named Doruval who had jumped in from the 8th picket and clearly regretted it. "The perimeter is absolute. We certify every emission that crosses it." "We certify every emission above the floor," Cora said. Her voice was flat through the translator, but she had brought all 4 arms forward, and on a Sethant that is the equivalent of a man going pale. "We have never certified what is beneath it. We assumed there was nothing beneath it worth certifying." "There is doctrine." "The doctrine," Cora said, "is what we are looking at the failure of. Be quiet, Doruval, and let me think." It was the first time in 210 days I had heard a Sethant tell another Sethant to be quiet. I marked it in my corner the way you mark a hairline crack in something you had believed was solid. The crack would widen. I had seen it before in other rooms on other stations, the slow structural failure of a certainty that has met the one thing it cannot hold. The Sethant were strong. Their certainty was strong. But strong is not the same as flexible, and the things that cannot bend are exactly the things that break. I want to be fair to the Sethant, because what happened over the next few cycles was not stupidity. It is easy from the back of the room to call it stupidity, and I have heard humans tell this kind of story that way, the clever species and the foolish aliens, and I have always thought less of the telling. The Sethant were not fools. They were thorough and disciplined and very old, and they had built a workable piece across 4 systems on the back of a simple idea, which was that the universe could be measured, and that a measured universe holds no surprises. The idea had served them for a long time. It had only one flaw, which was that it was not true, and the recovery flotilla was the price of the flaw coming due. What happened next was that the Commissariat did the most Sethant thing imaginable. Faced with a signal it could not certify, approaching from a position it could not explain, it convened a board. Cora called a verification board to the bridge. 3 senior analysts jumped in from the adjacent pickets, which took a cycle and a half in which I spent watching the recovery hail close range, packet by packet, its replies coming faster now, the latency dropping in a curve I could have drawn from memory. The board assembled around the central display, 4-armed and gray-crowned and grave, and they began, with enormous seriousness, to argue about jurisdiction. I am not exaggerating. The thing closing on us was, by their own engines' reckoning, large, not a probe, not a single vessel, but a formation, multiple structured sources holding tight relative geometry, which is to say a fleet, which is to say exactly the thing a recovery flotilla is. And the verification board's first action was to determine whether Band 11 fell under the authority of the Commissariat of Verified Signal or the Commissariat of Verified Transit. Because if the signal was transit, it was not theirs to act on, and to act on a thing outside your jurisdiction was a censure offense. I watched a fleet close range, while 4 old aliens argued about which form to file. I will give them this. They argued well. It was, in its way, an impressive thing to watch, 4 disciplined minds applying centuries of accumulated procedure to a problem, and if the problem had been a procedural one, they would have solved it beautifully. Doruval held that Band 11, being below the verification floor, fell under no commissariat's authority at all, since uncertified spectrum was by definition outside the certified jurisdictions, and that the proper course was to refer the matter upward and await a ruling. A thin analyst named Sevek countered that the signal had now crossed the floor and was therefore certified spectrum, retroactively, from the moment of crossing, which placed it squarely under verified signal, which was to say under Korreth. Doruval objected that retroactive certification was itself a contested doctrine requiring a board to convene, and that they were not the correct board, and that to act as if they were would expose them all to censure. The fourth, who never gave a name I caught, mostly agreed with whoever had spoken last. It went on. The latency curve dropped. The replies came faster, and the board, four-armed and grave and entirely sincere, debated the certification status of a frequency, while a fleet that did not care about certification climbed steadily toward us through the dark water below. I have thought a great deal since about why they did it. It is tempting to say they were hiding in the procedure, that the forms were a place to put their hands while the floor fell out from under them, and there is truth in that. But it is not the whole truth. The whole truth is that the procedure was the only tool they had ever needed. For a very long time, the Sethen had lived in a universe where every problem could be met by determining its jurisdiction and applying the relevant doctrine, because they had built that universe themselves, certified it into being one ruling at a time, and a being raised inside such a universe does not reach for a tool it has never required. They were not cowards. They were not even, in the moment, wrong to try. They were simply using the only language they had on a thing that did not speak it, the same way they had filed our vigil as noise, because noise was the only category they had for a sound they could not certify. I had a thought then, leaning at the back where they had told me to lean. I thought about the recordings my instructor had played, the lost ones, the ships that went dark and the colonies that stopped answering, and the long patient hails the recovery service had put out across the decades, format unchanged, voice unchanged, because the dead do not learn new languages and the service had sworn it would always speak in the tongue the lost would know. I thought about how a human distress call works. You do not send it once. You do not send it loud. You send it patient, on a band that costs nothing to hold, long after hope is a reasonable thing to keep, because the entire doctrine of human recovery rests on a single principle that the Sethen, with all their verification, had never once understood. The principle is that we come back for our own. We always come back. It is the oldest thing about us, older than the deathworld that made us, older than the predators we outlasted to inherit it. A human distress call is not a cry for help. It is a coordinate. It is a place where, sooner or later, on a timeline measured in lifetimes if it must be, something will arrive that has never stopped looking. The Sethen measured the universe and found it safe because they had decided what was worth measuring. They had filed our recovery format as noise because nothing in their doctrine could account for a species that would cross a contested system and hold a band beneath the floor for 19 cycles for the sole purpose of telling its loss that they had been heard. Tellan found me at my console late in that long cycle while the board argued. He had broken from the ring, which I had never seen a junior do, and he came to the back of the bridge where the human leaned. And he stood there with his four arms held in the uncertain posture they use when they have run out of doctrine. You knew, he said, the translator made it flat. His meaning was not flat. From the first morning, you knew what it was. I did not deny it. There was no point. I recognized the cadence, I said. It is yours, not a question. The format, it is a human format. It's a recovery hail, I said. Yes. Then why? He stopped, started again in the careful Sethen way, building the sentence like a case. There is a human aboard the Korreth Picket. The signal is a human recovery format. The flotilla is closing on our position. You understood all of this on the first morning and you filed nothing. You let the board argue about jurisdiction for a cycle and a half. His crown plates had darkened, which is a thing they cannot control, the way a human cannot control a flush. Why? I thought about how to answer him. I could have given him the disciplined answer that it was not my brief, that the Commissariat did not take filings from the human. It was even true. But Telon was young, and he had broken the ring to ask me a real question, and the young deserve a real answer when they are brave enough to come to the back of the room for it. Because you wouldn't have believed me, I said. If I told you on the first morning that the noise on Band 11 was a human fleet coming to collect one of its own, you'd have filed it as instrument drift, the same as you did, except you'd also have filed me as unreliable, and you'd have been more certain than ever that the universe was safe, because the only thing telling you it wasn't would have been the human, and the human doesn't get to file. I kept my voice low. I always kept my voice low. It is half the trade. Your engine had to find it on its own. Your floor had to be crossed by the thing itself. You had to hear it say, "We hear you," in your own language before you'd believe there was anything to hear. I couldn't give you that. I could only let it come. You could have warned us, Telon said. Even if we did not believe, you could have put it on the record. I could have, I agreed. And the record would have said the human made an unverified claim about an uncertified signal, and it would have sat in a file 3 jumps away until a committee released the funds to look at it, and by then this would all be over, one way or the other. I looked at him then properly, the way you look at someone you have decided to be honest with. You want to know the real reason, Telon, the one underneath. I'll give it to you because you came back here to ask. The real reason is that I have spent 210 days in this corner being a thing your people made allowances for, and some cold part of me wanted to watch the universe walk up out of the dark and introduce itself, and watch you all learn what I have always known. That is not a kind thing. I am not proud of it, but you asked for the truth, and that is the bottom of it. He took that in. The translator could do nothing with what passed across his crown plates, but I had been here 210 days, and I could read him, and what I read was not anger. It was something closer to grief, the grief of the young when they first understand that the people who raised them were working from a map of the world that left things out. "What is it?" he asked finally. "Your service, the thing that is coming, what is it?" "It's the part of us," I said, "that goes back. Every species that crosses distance loses people to it. Ships go dark. Colonies stop answering. The distance doesn't care, and most of the galaxy has learned to make its peace with the distance, to count its losses and close the file and move on because that is the sensible thing and the universe rewards the sensible." I shook my head. "We never learned to make that peace. We are not sensible. We built a service whose entire doctrine is that the file does not close, that a man who goes dark is not lost, only not yet found. And we built it to be patient, because patience is the only thing that beats distance, and we taught it to never, ever quit, because the day it quits is the day we stop being what we are." He was quiet a long moment. On the display behind him, the latency curve dropped again, and the recovery hail came in clean and patient and close, long, short, long, the gap now almost gone. "It is not coming for us," Telon said slowly, working it out. "It does not want this system. It does not want the planet. It has crossed a contested perimeter and broken our jurisdiction and learned our language, and it does not want any of it. It wants," he looked at me, and I think it was the first time a Sethan had ever truly looked at me, not as an unverified body but as a thing that belonged to the fleet on the band. "It wants you." "It wants whoever's lost," I said. "I'm the one that's here." I was not lost, strictly. I had been seconded to the picket by agreement, a liaison posting, a courtesy between powers that were not quite allies and not quite anything else. But I had been out of contact with my own service for 210 days, on a station that filed me as an unverified body and would not take my reports, in a system the recovery flotilla had every reason to read as a place where one of theirs had gone dark and stopped answering. From the outside, from the band, from the patient point of view of a thing that never stops looking, I looked exactly like a man who needed collecting. And the recovery service does not wait for you to confirm that you want to be found. It assumes you do. That assumption is the whole of its mercy and the whole of its terror, and the Sethan were about to meet both. "Telon," I said, "go back to the ring. Tell the commander to stand the picket down. Not surrender, stand down. Open challenge, hold position, weapons cold. If she runs the array hot when that flotilla makes the planet, she'll read as a threat to a recovery formation, and a recovery formation that reads a threat near a lost signal does not file a form. What does it do? He asked. I looked at the curve. The gap was almost gone now. It clears the area, I said. Procedurally, the way you'd clear debris from a runway, nothing personal in it. That's the part you won't believe until you see it. There's nothing personal in it at all. It's just removing an obstacle between itself and the thing it came back for. He went back to the ring. I watched him cross the bridge to where the board still argued, and I watched him do a thing I had not expected, which was to wait for a gap in the procedure, and then step into it. A junior interrupting a board of seniors, 4 arms held in the formal posture of someone delivering a recommendation he expects to be punished for. I could not hear what he said over the translator's general murmur, but I saw Korra's head turn, and I saw the board go quiet, and I saw Dorval begin to object and then stop, and I understood that the young analyst was spending whatever standing he had on a thing he had learned from the human in the corner, and that he believed it enough to spend it. I have wondered since whether Korra believed him, or whether she simply ran out of forms. The verification board was still arguing jurisdiction when the flotilla made the planet, and I think in the end it was not belief that saved the Korreth Picket but a kind of exhaustion, the board talking itself into stillness, the old commander deciding that a stand-down she could file was preferable to an engagement she could not. She gave the order, weapons cold, array passive, open challenge held. The picket went quiet and waited, four-armed and grave, and for the first time in its existence afraid. I have stood a great many waits in my service. The wait is the truest part of the work, truer than the arrival, because the arrival is over in moments and the wait can last a lifetime, and a man learns more about himself in the waiting than he ever does in the moment the waiting ends. The Sethant did not know how to wait like that. They knew how to be patient about names and funds and committees, a slow administrative patience, but they did not know the other kind, the kind where you have done everything that can be done and there is nothing left but to hold position and let the thing come, and I watched 40 of them discover it all at once, in real time on a bright bridge above a dark planet. Some held still, some could not. Tellen stood at his board with all 4 arms locked and did not move them once, and I thought, he is learning it faster than the rest. He will be all right. The ones who can learn the wait are always all right in the end. The flotilla came up out of the planet's gray weather into the daylight side at the start of the next pass, and I watched it on the main display from the back of the bridge, leaning where they had told me to lean. And I will tell you what it looked like because the Sethant could not have told you. They had no frame for it. It came up into the sunlight off the dark water, hull plating catching the light of the system star, dozens of structured sources resolving into ships as they climbed, holding the tight relative geometry that the engine had read as a single impossible artifact. They were not warships, exactly. They were the blunt, patient, over-engineered shapes that a recovery service builds, vessels designed to go into the worst places and stay as long as it takes and come back out carrying whoever was left. And there is nothing in the cosmos that looks more like a threat to a frightened observer and is less interested in being one. They had no clean lines. A warship is built to be seen and feared. It has an aesthetic, a deliberate menace. A recovery ship is built to survive places that kill ships, and it shows. The hulls were scarred and patched and overbuilt, thick where a warship would be sleek, studded with grapples and cutting gear and the blunt housings of tractor arrays, every line of them subordinated to the single question of whether they could reach a thing and hold it and bring it home. They were ugly. They were the most beautiful machines I have ever seen, and I have seen them many times, and they have never once stopped being beautiful to me. They climbed into the blue daylight over the planet the Sethant had never finished nomming, and they held there, formation tight, and the sunlight ran along their patched hulls and the planet's glow caught their undersides, and the whole formation put out a single hail on Band 11, the long, patient recovery format, clean and unhurried. The gap finally closed. "We hear you, we are here, confirm." I watched the Sethant watch it. I will remember their faces, if you can call them faces, for the rest of my life. 40 beings who had spent their careers certifying the universe into a safe and measured thing, looking at a fleet that had crossed a contested system through a band they had ruled empty, that had learned their language off a single ping, that wanted nothing they had and could not be stopped by anything they owned, and was, for all of that, not even pointed at them. It had not come for them. That was the part that broke something in the room, I think. Not the power. Power they could have understood. Power has a jurisdiction, power can be filed. What they could not file was the indifference. The flotilla had crossed all that distance and broken all their certainties, and it simply did not care about them, one way or the other, because they were not what it had come for. They were weather. They were terrain. They were a thing between the recovery service and its lost, and the recovery service had noted their position and adjusted around it and gone on, the way the tide notes a rock. The Picket's open challenge went out, automatic, the sentry's halt, and the recovery flotilla answered it the way it had answered everything, by folding the challenge into its own structure and sending it back with a packet appended in the Sethant's own tongue, learned off a single ping a cycle and a half ago, and the engine rendered the packet, and this time no junior read it aloud. Cora read it. She read it in silence, off her own board, and then she turned her gray-crowned head and looked, for the first time, all the way to the back of the bridge where the human leaned. "It is asking," she said, "for the return of its lost personnel, by name." A pause. The translator could not put the thing into her voice that I could see in the set of her forearms. "Your name." "Then I expect they'd like me to go," I said. It was the coldest sentence I have ever spoken, and I did not raise my voice to speak it. I had spent 210 days leaning where I was told, filing nothing, taking no reports, being an unverified body in a corner of a station that measured the universe into submission. And now, a fleet had crossed a contested system and held a band beneath the floor for 19 cycles, and learned an alien language in 11 minutes and climbed up out of dark water into daylight. All of it. The whole apparatus of human recovery. For the sole and patient purpose of collecting one man who had not even known he was lost. The Sethant had measured everything and accounted for none of it. There was nothing in their doctrine that could hold the size of what they were looking at, and the size of it was not in the ships. It was in the principle. We come back for our own. We always come back. The gap always closes. I keyed my console for the first time in the whole affair. One transmission, on band 11, in the format I had been taught the way other children were taught prayers. I sent my service number, and my status, and the single clean packet that the recovery service waits its whole patient existence to receive. Located, recovered, coming home. The flotilla acknowledged. The challenge tone stopped. The weapons that the Sethant had been so afraid of, that had never once been brought to bear, went on not being brought to bear because there had never been anything to bear them against. The recovery service had not come to fight a picket. It had come to collect a man, and it had found him, and a recovery service that has found its lost does not linger to make a point. It does not file a form. It opens a lane, and it waits, and it does not hurry, because hurrying is for things that are not certain they will succeed, and the recovery service had been certain across 19 cycles and a contested perimeter and a band beneath the floor. I went to my locker and I packed my kit, which did not take long, because there is not much you accumulate in 210 days when you are an unverified body. I packed the ration sleeve with the days counted on the back of it. I left the rest. When I came back through the bridge with my kit on my shoulder, the verification board was still assembled around the central display. 4 old aliens and a frightened junior, and they were not arguing anymore. They were watching the flotilla hold its lane in the daylight, and I think for the first time in the history of their thorough and disciplined and very old civilization, they were looking at a thing they could not file, and they were letting it be true anyway. That is a hard thing to do, when you have measured the universe your whole life. I do not think it was a small mercy that I had let them come to it on their own. I think it may have been the only kind that would have held. Vessel Cora met me at the lock. Her upper arms were folded behind her, but not from boredom now. I had learned the difference. "You will tell your service," she said, "that the Korreth Picket stood down, that it did not run the array hot, that it filed a stand down it could account for." "I'll tell them," I said, and I would. The recovery service keeps records the way the Sethant keep records, except that ours are about who came home. "There was a moment," Cora said, "on the 4th cycle when it answered our challenge in our own language, when I understood that everything I had been taught about the safety of a measured universe was a thing we had agreed to believe because it let us sleep." The translator was flat. Her forearms were not. "I do not yet know what to do with that understanding. I expect it will take a great many cycles." "It usually does," I said. "I have commanded pickets for longer than you have been alive," she went on, and I let her, because the old ones earn the right to say a thing out loud once before they fold it away. "I have certified 10,000 emissions. I have ruled on jurisdictions that settled wars. I believed I understood the shape of what was out there because I had measured so much of it, and a being who has measured enough comes to believe that the unmeasured is merely the not yet measured, more of the same, waiting its turn." She brought her upper arms forward, deliberately, the gesture of attention she had spent 210 days never once directing at me. "You knew, the first morning, that I was wrong. You stood in your corner and you knew. And you let me be wrong and let it come, because you judged that I would not survive being told. Was that mercy, human, or was it contempt?" It was a fair question, and she had earned a fair answer. "Both," I said. "I won't pretend otherwise, but mostly it was the only thing that would have worked. Some truths a being has to walk into. You can't be told the floor isn't solid. You have to feel it go." She held that a moment. Then she did a thing I had not seen a Sethant do, which was to incline her crown plates toward me, a small precise bow, the kind one commander gives another. "The Korreth Picket will review its floor," she said, "and I will see that the review remembers there was a human in the corner who heard what we filed as noise. It will not be a comfortable record. I will keep it anyway." "That's the whole trade," I said, "keeping the uncomfortable record." "The signal," she said. "Beneath our floor for 19 cycles, we will be reviewing our floor." "That be wise." I stepped into the lock. Tellan was there, the brave young junior who had broken the ring to ask the human a real question, and he stood in the uncertain four-armed posture of someone who has run out of doctrine and has not yet been issued a new one. He did not say anything. There was nothing in his training for goodbye to an unverified body that had turned out to be the lost personnel of a fleet that crossed systems to collect its own. "You'll review your floor," I told him, "and you'll find 100 things you filed as noise. Most of them will be noise, some of them won't. The trick isn't measuring better. You measure fine. The trick is being willing to hear a thing that isn't speaking in your language and that doesn't care whether you certify it." I shifted my kit. "We're not the only ones out here who come back for our own. You'll meet the others eventually, now your floor's open. Some of them won't be as patient as we are." The lock cycled. I crossed to the recovery ship through a daylit tube with the blue planet turning below, and the system's star hard on the hull plating, and somewhere behind me, a picket station that had measured the universe into submission stood quiet in the light and watched a thing it could not file, and let it be true. They named the planet in the end. I heard about it later, the way you hear about everything eventually. They convened the committee, 3 jumps away, and released the funds, and after a great deal of argument they gave unverified body 6 a name. They named it for the band. Band 11. The frequency beneath their floor, the one they had filed as noise for 19 cycles, the one a fleet had held across a contested system to tell its loss that it had been heard. I think that was as close as the Sethant could come to saying the thing out loud. They could not put it in a report. They could not certify it. But they took the place where they had learned that the universe was not safe, and they gave it the name of the sound they had almost failed to hear, and they wrote it into the record where it would outlast all of them. The recovery service debriefed me and logged my return and put me back on the rotation, because there are always more lost than there are found, and the band never goes quiet for long. The debrief was a quiet thing, conducted by a recovery officer older even than Korreth in her own way, a woman who had spent 40 years going back for people and had the stillness that comes of it. She asked me the standard questions, and I gave the standard answers, and at the end she asked me the one that is not on the form, the one they ask when they think you have been out too long among people who do not go back. She asked whether I had ever, in all those 210 days, doubted that the service would come. I told her the truth. I told her it had never once crossed my mind to doubt it, and that this was the strangest part of the whole affair, stranger than the fleet or the four-armed board or the planet they named for a frequency. I had been forgotten by everyone aboard that station, filed as an unverified body, a man without a place. And I had never doubted for an instant that somewhere on a band beneath everyone's floor, my own were still listening, still patient, still coming. She nodded at that and closed the file and put me back on the rotation, because a man who still believes the service will come is exactly the man you want crewing the ships that go. I kept the ration sleeve with the days counted on the back. 210. I have it still. Sometimes a younger one asks me about the picket, the way Tellan asked me at the back of the bridge, and I tell them what I told him, that the trick is not measuring better, that the trick is being willing to hear the thing that does not speak your language and does not care whether you approve of it. And when they ask me what it was like, leaning at the back of that bridge for 210 days, an unverified body in the corner, filing nothing, waiting, I tell them the truth, which is that I was never waiting. I knew how it ends. I have always known how it ends. The gap always closes. We always come back. It is the oldest thing about us. And the Sethant measured everything in 4 systems and never once thought to measure that. And so they filed it as noise, until the noise climbed up out of the dark water into the daylight and asked for me by name. I told them I expected they'd like me to go. And I went home,